Hey there, and guess what? You're right. It is time for another episode of Unstoppable Mindset. Today, we get to interview Julie Ellis, who's going to tell us about a lot of different stuff, including something called Mabel's Labels that we were just talking about, but we're not going to start with that, but we'll get to it. Have to leave you a little bit in suspense. We hope you enjoy the podcast and that you, as always, will give us a 5-star rating when you go to review us, and we really appreciate your reviews. But for now, let's get to our conversation with Julie. And Julie, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so delighted to be here.
Well, we are just as delighted to have you. So we don't even need to see who's more delighted. We're both very delighted. So that works. But
it sure does.
Why don't we start with maybe, which I love to do, tell me a little about the early Julie growing up and some of those kinds of things and so on.
The early Julie growing up, moved around a little bit before we settled into where I did most of my school years. And, had a very sort of 70s childhood. Everybody had to go home when the streetlights came on. And we roamed around the neighborhood together in a pack and got up to lots of things that were probably slightly troublesome in the big picture, but we never got into any big difficulties. And then I did a bunch of dance training as a kid and worked at the studio. I cleaned the studio. I helped teach classes to pay for the lessons, and I ended up going on and doing my university degree in dance.
So the trouble you got into as Congressman John Lewis, or the late John Lewis, would say it was good trouble, right?
It was good trouble.
Good
indeed.
trouble, yeah. So you moved around a little bit at first. Where did you move around from and to?
Well, we started out in Vancouver and lived outside of New York for a little while, and in Montreal and Toronto before we landed in a little small town just west of Toronto, where I spent most of my childhood.
My goodness, a little bit in New York. What took you guys there?
My dad's work.
What did he do?
He worked in the finance industry. And so, of course, that's one of the big hubs of the world.
Yeah. Well, needless to say, New York tends to have that rep. And a lot of finance stuff goes through there. And I, as you know, was there for a while and dealing in the financial markets. And what a crazy place. Have you ever visited, or did you ever visit one of the trading floors from the stock?
I never have. I would love to. That would be so fascinating.
I hear it's a little bit more calm, so I don't know, but I know back in the late 90s into 2000s, it was pretty crazy if you went onto a trading floor, and probably the movie Wall Street depicted some of it pretty well, but it was pretty crazy to go on those trading floors.
Yeah. And I think probably the digitization and, the papers they used to throw and all the things that would happen, some of that excitement is gone for sure.
You mean they don't throw computers now?
No.
Oh, okay.
Hopefully not.
Yeah, I know that a lot of the Wall Street firms moved to Sun Microsystems computers because they were fast. They could be programmed in the ways that they needed to be. The footprint was great, and that's what was adopted. And over the years, I don't know what they're using now, but you're right. It is a different place, and probably they're not throwing as much, but there's still a lot of the wheeling and dealing and ethics and lack thereof.
Yep. Always. It seems to be part of society at all times, really.
Yeah, it is strange, but what do you do?
Yep.
So you majored in dance. Any specific dance?
It was mostly a teaching focus for ballet. So focus on child development and how kids' brains are working as they grow and as they learn to do things physically. It's often tied to the development of their brain.
And what did you discover about all that?
That I really love teaching. And they had a special program with a very high quality teaching program at a ballet school where you could kind of get a dual track education. But for me, my dream changed because I had an injury that really stopped me from dancing at a high level. And so that set me on a very different path.
What kind of injury?
Cartilage and knee
Uh,
problems.
it
And
wasn't an ego
so,
injury. Just checking.
no. No, physical
Yeah.
limitation. And so I
Yeah.
started looking for other things.
And what did you discover or do?
Well, I ended up going into a management training program at a bank where I had worked.
Back to finance. Okay,
Back
go
to
ahead.
finance. Here we are. And so I went through a management training program and became an account manager, lending money and looking after a book of clients and that sort of thing. And ultimately became an accredited financial planner.
Ah,
So I had a book of clients that I worked with and helped them with their, sort of plans and their lives and the investments they wanted to make and all of those sorts of things. And I really loved working with people.
well, of course, that's the real important part about it. And you chose a profession that certainly allowed you to do that, and you could be a major help to people in a lot of different ways, I would think.
Yeah. 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 And there were a lot of things I liked about it. And there were a lot of things that probably at the time in my life that I was at, where I had young kids and a young family, and I wanted to continue to advance in my career, but felt kind of limited with the role I was in and where I might go next.
So how long ago was that?
That was about in the early 2000s.
Okay.
That I was in that role. And so then, starting to sort of look for what an entrepreneurial venture might look like, sort of the regain control of my schedule and have more time with my family idea, which, turned out to be not so true. But definitely, looking at something that I could control my own destiny a little bit more. And I think that's really then, being a mom and seeing the need for things in the marketplace that weren't there, sending kids to daycare where they said, please label everything. And we said, well, how? And they said, well, permanent marker and masking tape.
Oh.
And so we kind of thought that we could do something that was better than that.
So what did you do?
Well, we spent over a year doing research and testing to try and find a labeling product that we could print personalized labels that would go through the dishwasher, the microwave, be UV resistant, label all the things that parents sent out into the world so they would come home again.
And of course, the logical question becomes, what did you find?
Well, we over time worked our way through a few different technologies, but we found that it was possible to do it. And so in 2003, we set up a little e-commerce venture called Mabel's Labels and started selling labels direct to consumers on the internet. And
Wow.
once they ordered labels, we were custom manufacturing them in our own facility.
Well, and Mabel's Labels got to be, I guess, relatively visible in Canada and elsewhere.
It did. Yeah. North America, we were the first to market in North America. And we built a great brand that, got a lot of coverage in a lot of different media. We were on the Today Show, on The View, CNN, lots of coverage, People Magazine, all the places that we wanted to be found. And so we were able to really grow the brand. And we really we made a really quality product, and we had a no questions asked return policy. So if you did not like your product, we would refund your money.
I would trust since the business was successful, you didn't have many returns.
We did not. We had very high standards, and we, wanted to stand by the product we were making.
Now, is that still going on today?
It is. Yeah, they're doing really well. We grew the business quite nicely up into 8 figures in revenue. We launched a couple of other products that we sold in Target and Walmart. And we eventually, in late 2015, sold the business to Avery Labels.
That, well, you can't sell to a much larger company than that, can you?
No, no. As I always say, when a giant in your industry comes knocking on the door, you at least have a conversation. And
Yes.
so that's what we did. We had a conversation, and it turned out there was quite a lot of fit in terms of, I think you get to a point in your journey of entrepreneurship where taking some of your money off the table is desirable. And, when you think about getting older and retiring and all those things, like being able to sell your business is certainly important. And I think that, there was a good fit. The company that owns Avery is Canadian. They make lots of acquisitions. They let those companies run themselves. You have a general manager, you run as a business unit. And so we would keep our team, we would keep our real estate, we would keep, a lot of things would be the same. A lot of things would change because they do, but a lot of things would also be able to stay the same.
Well, and that was actually going to be one of the questions I was going to ask was what happened to the people? Because oftentimes in acquisitions, they want the technology, but they're not really interested in the people. So
Right.
they didn't do that with Avery.
No, they wanted to us to run a profitable business for them. And so we were able to do that and really, take advantage of being under the umbrella with a lot of knowledge and those kinds of things, but also retain, a good amount of independence.
Well, to use the term, there's something to be said for tribal knowledge. And if you get rid of the people, you lose that. You lose all the knowledge that they have. And it's lovely to talk about having the technology, but there's so much more when you start to deal with the people. How many people were on the team when you sold it?
We had about 40.
So that was a sizable group.
Yes, it was. It was.
Has it grown since, or do you know?
Mm-hmm. They're still growing. Yeah.
Now, you're not directly connected with them, though, anymore.
No, I ended up leaving about a half a year after the sale.
So you just buy labels today.
I do. Well, I do. I do still know people there. So sometimes I get them for free, but
you get a deal.
They do.
That's fair, though. But it's exciting that it has grown and continues to grow.
Yeah.
And as you said, clearly a great Canadian business success story that happened. So you, for 13 or 14 years, just devoted your life to that.
Yeah.
And so you sold the company. And then what did you do?
Then I felt like I needed a break. And integrating your small venture, even with 40 people, into a big publicly traded company is a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
Going through the due diligence process, all of the things. And so I felt like I wanted a little bit of a break, and I took one, eventually going on to run a business for somebody else. And about 18 months into that engagement, I really realized that I wanted to build something for myself again. I didn't want to work for somebody else. So it took sort of two tries at that. And then I sort of said, okay, so what am I going to do now? What are the big dreams that I have for myself, and how am I going to go about, getting on track and really starting to chase them?
And where did you go with that?
Well, I think that as entrepreneurs, a lot of the time we're really climbing for pinnacles. The top of the mountain is, we're game. We got our backpacks on and we're here for the climb. And I hit this plateau after I left Mabel's Labels, and I didn't really know what to do. And I struggled with that, with the idea of not having anything defined. And I wasn't sure what I would do next, to be honest. And so I sort of, I was like, you know what? I really, as a manager and a leader of people, I love to coach and grow and develop my team, and and to bring them together and to really, really work hard together. And so I decided to go through a coaching program because I didn't really know what else I was going to do at that point. And it gave me some structure and it gave me something to look forward to. And I met some great new people. So starting to sort of branch out my network and meet people that are doing different things. And it's where I really started thinking about the idea of, so here I was having done something, in a brand that was recognized, actually selling the business, the entrepreneur's dream, right? You build your business and you sell it. And there I was really unsure of what to do next and, losing my way a little bit on that big thinking and feeling very uncertain. And as I started getting back in touch with, what my own big dreams were for myself, I really started to think about, why do some people do big things? And why are some of us, ending up in the dust of our to-do lists? And I felt a little bit like that's where I was, in the dust of a to-do list and not chasing my big, big dreams. And, I started talking with people about what they had done and why they did it and telling my story. And it really is one of those things, what you see of people is the actual pinnacle of the achievement. It's not the long and difficult road, the sleepless nights, the crying over, the spilled milk or the things of the day and the struggles that you've had in getting there.
Right.
And I found that, kind of interesting. So I started talking to people who had been very successful and trying to uncover why they were, why they felt they were successful. What were the ingredients that helped them reach that pinnacle? And what started to happen was, whether they were the visionary and came at it from a very big dreams kind of way, or whether they were the person who could operationalize it and build it up, inevitably they felt like the ingredients were the same. So you needed the right people. The right team had to be there. You needed the right supports. You needed the right processes to, so that the team could all work and pull together. And you needed the right systems that could help you sustain and grow something. And without those things, it all starts, the wheels start falling off the car.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I found that really interesting because I thought, with people having such different kind of viewpoints of how they approach things, that those ingredients might not be the same. And I was really surprised as I started peeling back, why do you think you got to your own big, gorgeous goals? That was where we kind of landed. And it felt like where I was sitting with what I experienced myself. And so, eventually I wrote a book about it because I was so interested in this idea that, you have to step out and be bold, and that chasing your big, gorgeous goals is really about like finding your own magnificence and stepping into it. And if we play it safe all the time, we don't get there.
What did you discover were your big dreams that you really wanted to do? Because clearly that's a lot of what you have to address as you go forward. Yeah. You have your own desires, you have your own goals, your big, gorgeous goals, and you have your dreams. What were yours?
At first, it was really about getting my message out to the world. So, how doing things like, leading workshops, writing a keynote, eventually writing the book. But I also really have focused in on women as entrepreneurs and, how we came up as entrepreneurs, myself and my co-founders, and the support networks we built around ourselves to help us be successful. And those support networks were, coaches, advisors, mentors, all the, some of the team members and their expertise that we hired. And, what that sort of melding of things kind of looked like. And thinking about how I could take the the fortunate position I found myself in with, the coaching certification, the experience in building an 8-figure business and then running another business, and how I could bring that to the table to help people think about how they want to grow their own bigger businesses.
One of the things that strikes me with regard to all that we've been talking about here and that you sort of said earlier is that clearly one of the things that you liked to do was to teach.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like along the way, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but it occurred a little bit, was you lost sight of that as you were doing the business and so on. And I'm sure that you realized that and it came back. But that's just one of the things that was one of the ultimate sort of ingrained goals that you had.
I think you're right about that. And I think I lost it maybe in the after of selling the business, because really a coach or a teacher can be similar shades of the same thing. Right. And I would say that is very much my management style, is a coaching style. I like to teach people how to be self-sufficient. I like a culture of accountability within my team, where all the decisions aren't hinging on the management at the top. The decisions are being made effectively and constantly by the team.
Right. Well, and but you did come back to it, and
I did.
And now you coach and teach.
Yes, I do. And I really love it.
Which proves the point in a sense, but there you go. So where did you coin the term gorgeous, if I could talk, I'd be good, big, gorgeous goals from?
I think it was really a reflection of, like, everybody talks about, big, hairy, audacious goals or big, but like there's something about gorgeous. And one of the definitions in the dictionary is magnificent when you think about gorgeous, the word gorgeous. And I just love the idea that it is about these magnificent goals. They're gorgeous. They're somehow, it feels like rich, like something that there's a lot of things to be peeled back, a lot of layers, a lot of things. And it feels like that sort of like when you're manifesting something and you're really trying to make that leap forward, it's the big leap forward. It's the big thing that is, where you find your life's purpose, where you find the things that are going to really drive you forward. And yet at the same time, I think I like the word because driving forward to those places can be scary. So when we get outside of that zone where we feel comfortable, where we are, pushing the bleeding edge of our skills and our abilities and our confidence, that's where we can struggle and end up back in that sort of checklist, to-do list mode.
Well, so there are all sorts of goals. What would you describe as a big, gorgeous goal as opposed to just a goal?
I think it's the kind of goal where you don't know what all the ingredients are for it, or you don't or that you don't have them all. So there's something missing. It's not a goal where you're like, oh, I'm going to write it down. I'm going to measure it. I know exactly the steps that I have to go down. I'm going to bring these people to the table, and then we're going to complete it by January 15th. It's more like a goal where it feels like you can't quite get it defined, or you have a really pretty good idea of where you're going, but you don't have the money, the knowledge, the people. You're not sure where you're going to find them. You need to build a network for it. It's where there are unknowns or gaps. And I think part of the process that's really important for it is to have a check-in of, like, on a quarterly basis. What I like to do is sit down and say, okay, where did I think I was going? Where have I gotten to? Let's calibrate. Am I still heading towards, is the goal shifting? Is the goal still the same? And if so, am I getting where I need to be? Because I think that sometimes they come into clarity as you start climbing. They're not clear in the very beginning.
Yeah, the bottom line with big goals, big, gorgeous goals, lofty goals, whatever you want to call them, is that a lot of times things can change during the course of what you're trying to do to achieve the goal. And that's not a bad thing.
Not a bad thing at all. And I think that it's like, it reminds me of, when you would set goals in business, you will never hit something on 100%, right? If you set a dollar target for sales, you are never going to sell to that dollar. You will sell $5 less or $5,000 more, or miss it by $500,000 or overshoot by 2 million, whatever the case, right? You're never going to hit it bang on. And the thing with big, gorgeous goals is you have to allow yourself the room to continue to adjust them as you figure out. And I don't mean simplify them or make them easier to get. That's not what we're after. But you need to allow yourself the space for that adjustment to get where you're really meant to be.
Which really gets down to things like how you get there, which becomes part of what you have to do with the goal. It isn't getting there, but it's how you get there. Maybe your motivation changes, why you get there, and what is there anyway. And so those are all aspects of it. And I agree, it makes a whole lot more sense to have a goal that, from an overall direction and a vision standpoint, can change as you change and move toward achieving the goal.
Definitely. I think it's a really important piece. I think the other thing that's really important is, allowing yourself the space to, dream bigger and to imagine those possibilities and to figure out how to access that. And, that for me is one of the things where I value myself as an employee, whether it's an employee of my own self or an employee for, a business I own or whatever, on my capacity and ability to get things done. And so putting, sort of white space on my calendar to, go out into nature, take a walk, do something that will, even just read a book or lay down on the couch and really think about how I want things to unfold, that doesn't always feel productive to me. And so we also have to find this place where, you have to almost still and quiet yourself and get out of the busy, 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 go, go, go mode that we find ourselves in, because we just keep filling our lives with this busyness, and we're not taking that time to create the space to have those dreams and really think about how we need to get uncomfortable and start chasing them.
How do we deal with the people who say, I just don't have time to do all that. I've just got to keep moving forward and going toward what I'm supposed to do. And as a result, I would say they lose track. But how do we get people to take that time and slow down and recognize the incredible value of taking introspection time and so on each day?
Learning to say no is big and important. I think that's one. I really don't like saying no. I learned that about myself. I want to say yes to everything. I want to do all the things and have all the fun. And I need to do, one of the things I'm saying is, for next year, I want to do more of less. I want to focus on less things so that I can do more of those things. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what big, gorgeous goals is about. It's about really, yes, I'm going to have to say no to some things that might give me short-term gratification or just keep me in that busy state, but they don't necessarily matter. It's about prioritization, and we can all prioritize. We may not like to, but we can do it.
That's really the issue, isn't it? We can do it. We just need to learn to be willing to it. I've been a proponent for a long time of the concept of taking time each day to think about what happened today, what worked, what didn't work, and even going so far as to say, why did what worked work? And can I make it better? Much less what didn't work and what were the problems? Because we always focus so much on why didn't this work that we never look at the positive aspects of what worked and what could I do to even make that better, or what are the lessons to learn from that.
It's so true. Thinking about what are the pieces, especially here as you sit at, the changeover of years, that sort of thing. What are the things to actually take forward with us? What were the great things that happened that we want more of? I think you're right. We have a predisposition to here's everything that went wrong.
Yeah.
Never doing that again.
Yeah. Which is probably not a wise thing, because if it went wrong, that's not and I've learned to say that's not a failure. All that means is, okay, it went wrong. Let's look at why and what can we learn from that. I used to always say, and I've said it several times on these podcasts, I used to always say, I'm my own worst critic. And I've realized what a wrong thing to say, because really I'm my own best teacher. And that puts a whole different positive spin on it. And the reality is I'm my own best teacher. And in fact, no one can teach me anything. They can provide me with information, but I have to teach myself. And if I learn to be my own best teacher and take everything as a teaching opportunity and experience, how much more positive and better that is.
It's a really, really interesting change of perspective.
Yeah.
Right. And it is amazing how if you can shift that perspective and look at something from a different angle, you can reveal things that are so valuable.
I still do. When I give a speech, I record it and I go back and listen to it. And I always used to say I'm my own worst critic, so I want to listen to it. And I force myself to listen to it. And I've learned it's a blessing to be able to listen to it. And again, taking it from the standpoint of I'm my own best teacher, it makes it a whole lot more fun to listen to. And I still look for the things that I can improve. But actually, I discover more things that I can improve when I think about it as me being a teacher of myself than if I'm just worried about being my own worst critic.
Yeah. And I think that's where, having some amount of like journaling or a recording method that captures some of that stuff is so important too, because you are then able to look back and, find that thread and start to pull on it. And, what is it I'm seeing here? What is it that I'm consistently bumping up against? Am I self-sabotaging? Am I in fear? Am I, coming to this from a place of lack? What is it that's stopping me? And then on the other hand, what is it I'm doing right? What's happening? What's going really well? What are the things that I said a year ago that I have just, punched through and made such a difference for? And so I think that it is with that sort of like longer term tracking, it really helps you see those trends and themes too.
And there's no wrong answer to any of that. With what's right and what's wrong, there's no wrong answer. There are answers. And the issue is what I decide to do with the information. And that's really what it comes down to, is getting the information. And there's no wrong answer to that information. It's, again, how I use it and what I choose to do with it.
Yeah, it is. It's that informational, and I mean, it's listening, right? It's like really listening and really thinking about those things and just trying to get yourself into tune with what's happening, I think.
So the name of your book is?
Big Gorgeous Goals, How Bold Women Achieve Great Things.
Do men read it too?
They do, and they tell me they like it.
As they should. But yeah, I mean, it is really important, I think, that people recognize that concepts work for everyone. And that's a good thing to do.
Yeah. And I think, I took the focus on women because I think in the entrepreneurial world, they face challenges of, 3% of venture capital goes to women. Women typically don't grow their businesses as big, like those kinds of stats that made me really narrow in and focus on like, why are there some women that are just, and how do we become them? Why are they killing it? And how do we become them?
Right. And there are reasons for it. Again, I think it goes back with like a lot of things to what we teach and how we teach, but more what we teach. And women generally aren't taught to necessarily think as big or be as strong as they can be.
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
And they should.
Yeah,
And that's,
absolutely.
yeah. And not everyone, man or woman, is necessarily going to do the kinds of things that you did in taking a company to 8 figures and selling it. And that's also okay. But we all have gifts and we all have skills. And what we really need to do is to learn what our gifts and skills are.
Yeah. Yeah. And to figure out, if that is something that you really want to do, like really, there's no reason you can't. And so then it's about how do you put the right people around you, the right systems, the right processes, and, start making the right steps forward. Because I think that although it will never be easy to do it, there are harder paths and easier paths to take while you go on the journey.
Yeah. So today, I'm assuming that you do a lot of teaching and coaching of people to help them learn how to create and develop these big, gorgeous goals.
I do. And I help them build strategies to grow their businesses.
How do you and what do you teach people? How do you teach people to develop these goals and to establish a mindset that says, I can create these goals and I'm going to do it, and then go do it?
I think it's about, peeling back those layers of like, well, what if it was bigger than that? What if it was, as big as I could imagine? What would it look like if I climbed a little higher? What would it look like if I put an extra 0 on that? And just it's pushing a little bit, asking a lot of questions and really pushing people to sit in discomfort as they think about what they really, really desire. And then it's about saying, okay, and now we've got something. What are the next steps? What are the first 3 steps? Because ultimately, the sort of tension you have to create is having something big and potentially not fully defined, and then breaking it down into some kind of actionable, steps. And if you're thinking about climbing a mountain, I think the pinnacle of a mountain always looks far away until you're basically upon it. And so you have to create a cadence of climbing and looking behind you and seeing where you've come. And then you need to stop, put the goal away, put your head down and walk some more. And so those are the pieces of then you need some practical steps to follow, and you need to get into a cadence of checking in to see how you're doing, recalibrating, figuring out the next steps, and moving forward again.
And unfortunately, it seems to me a lot of times we just don't teach any of that. We don't teach people that it's okay to think beyond your comfort zone, but rather we teach people to do what's comfortable and not go beyond it. How do we change that overall in a society? Because I see it so often. I've seen it with blind people who don't have necessarily overly high aspirations. I've seen it with a lot of people in business who think they do, but they don't. How do we change that?
I think it is, that be the change you want to see in the world. I think it's about having more people talking about these things, moving outside their comfort zones and chasing this and really telling the world that they're doing it.
And recognizing that it's okay to do.
Yeah, it's more than okay. Like it feels like we could solve so many problems if we reached for something really big.
Right.
And I think that it is, it also, that stepping into our magnificence piece, living the life of your innermost heart's desire.
So a lot of times we are where we are because something's holding us back, whatever that may be. How do we discover that? And what happens when we really let go with what's holding us back?
That's when I think we can make fast progress, is when we're able to let go of it. I think that trying to, use some tools and techniques to figure out what it is that's holding us back. And, whether it's a coach or a mastermind group or mentors or paid advisors or all of the different ways, I think a lot of getting through what holds us back is about knowledge and people that will help us to, break through some of that.
It gets to the time, I think, at some point where when people are discouraging us from moving out of comfort zones and saying, well, you really can't do that, or that's just unrealistic, that we have to develop a thick enough skin and surround ourselves with people who will help us develop a thick enough skin to say, no, I can do more than you think I can do.
Yeah. Yes. And we have to believe that within ourselves.
Yeah. That's really it. And we've got to learn ourselves that it's okay and to think bigger than we do.
Mm-hmm. And that, I think that everybody's scared on some level. We all have the voice in our head that doubts or tells us we can't. We all have fear zones that are hard for us to cross, and nobody is without it.
The other side of it is, though, that we also have voices in our head that are telling us we can. And we have to learn how to maybe listen to both voices and make a decision. And the problem is, all too often, we only listen to the negative voice. And again, I think it is what we're so collectively often taught, that we only listen to the negative and we don't listen to the other side of it.
Yeah, we got to switch the channel and listen to the positives that are there for us, and look for those positives that are there for us. Look for the reasons why we should do something.
There is really something to be said for the fact that we have a mind, we have a way of thinking, and that all too often we ignore our inner voice that's telling us to do something. My favorite example is Trivial Pursuit, right? You're playing a game of Trivial Pursuit and the question comes up and you immediately think of an answer, and then you go, no, that isn't right. And invariably, when it comes out, the answer that you originally thought of was the right answer. We just don't listen to that inner voice nearly enough.
Yeah. That sort of like, what is your gut telling you? What's that first imagined thing that, yes, I could do this. And then no, and then you start to say, oh, no, that can't be right. I mean, we have to learn to trust those instincts and trust those little whispers and to listen to them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And work to try it. I mean, at least you can experiment with it and see, well, what happens if I try that? Well, let's try that and see what happens.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's nothing. Scientists fail at their experiments all the time. And so if we think of ourselves like scientists, then we can give ourselves permission to fail and try again. That it's part of that process. And I think we get to holding too much importance on success, and that it has to be big and it has to be immediate. And the truth is, any success is made up of a whole lot of failure.
Or little successes.
Absolutely. Both. It's made up of both. Likely. It
is. Right. Mm-hmm. Well, and the issue is we oftentimes don't really focus on what success really means.
Yes.
It isn't always just about getting bunches of money.
No.
And I mean, you clearly did with Mabel's labels, but you had other successes. You found so many jobs for people in the company, and it's still your success in a sense that it continues to grow today, which has to be cool.
It is cool. And it's always cool to sit in an airport and watch somebody walk by with a Mabel's label on their, water bottle or the suitcase, or, that will endlessly bring a smile to my face.
And that's great, and it wasn't an accident that it happened. Some people will say, well, you were just lucky. No. You did a lot of listening to your gut.
Yep, we did. And, I think luck is an interesting thing, because I think we maybe had some luck in the timing of which we wanted to enter the market, at the sort of dawn of the e-commerce era. We had great fortune with some of the things we did, but none of it was easy. And, we weren't magically lucky that one day we sold the business. We worked really hard and we made our own luck in a lot of ways also.
Yeah, which is why it isn't so much luck as it is working to achieve those big, gorgeous goals.
Exactly. Yes.
So when you were working with the company and you developed the goals that you did, and well, let me ask this: did you ever imagine that you would sell to Avery when you were working with the company and getting started and all that? Was that ever something that was in your mind or a goal that you eventually had?
I would say no, except that one of the things we did at the very, very beginning was we had a budget for stamps, and we made an Excel spreadsheet and trimmed it and trimmed it and trimmed it because we had more people on it than we had stamps. And we sent out a letter to a lot of friends and family saying, we're starting this business. Here's what we're doing. Love to hear from you. Check out our website. And the night that we all got together and stuffed those into envelopes, somebody had, a cheap bottle of champagne sitting around, and we cooled it down and we opened it up and we toasted and said, here's to the IPO we're going to have someday.
There you go.
Yeah. So we did. We had big, gorgeous goals for Mabel's Labels from the very beginning.
Nothing wrong with that.
No.
And the issue is it wasn't just words to you. I mean, I've known a number of companies that say, oh, we're going to have this big IPO. We're going to do all this stuff. And it's really so much talk because they don't at all think of how are we going to get there. But clearly at some level and at some point, you thought about the fact that you wanted to grow the company. What do we do now to grow the company? And it wasn't necessarily, what am I going to do in 10 years to grow the company? But you thought about the whole issue of company growth and you took it very seriously.
We did. And we spent a lot of time, we had a good planning process and a good, where we would sit down and say, how are we going to find more customers, sell more things to the ones we have, get people to come back and, continue to provide the kind of experience that we want as we grow the business.
Yeah. Well, how would you say that systems, people, and processes and just sort of the mechanisms help you when you start to think of something big?
I would say that I think about, do I need to hire somebody to help me with this? Where's my zone of genius on it? And where am I going to need help with it? So is that through, my network and somebody I know who can share their wisdom with me? Is it somebody I need to hire? Is it, a piece of like a system I need to actually implement within the business through software or through something like that? Or is it a way I need to be working and a thing I need to do? And that's more where the process comes in, is how are we doing this? And is there something else that I need to implement or uncover in order to be able to do it? Mm-hmm. And so I think that, it comes into all the things. And, as you grow a business, the things that you put into place at the beginning don't serve you as the business grows and changes all the time.
That has to change.
Yeah. So it is that cycle. It's a cycle and or a flow of, how you do things and how you get to that next spot and how you continue. It's a kind of a bit of a continuous improvement and a continuous thinking about what way could we do this? How could I, get into a new channel or a new place or sell a new product or offer a new service? And what does that look like? And how do you go about that?
Yeah. When you were writing Big Gorgeous Goals, did you do it all yourself or did you have anyone that you worked with?
I wrote all the words myself. I was in a couple of different author groups. The first one really helped me hone my ideas. I wrote sort of an outline of what I thought the book would be in that group and, really tried out my material. And then after about a year there, I landed in a daily writing group. And AJ, the woman who runs the group, you show up for an hour every day and you write. And you stay away from your writer's block. You start writing and you ask questions and you have a little bit of chit chat, but it's a writing group. And I wrote the whole book that way in about 6 months.
Yeah. I remember when I first started writing Thunderdog, when we actually got down to the writing, actually somebody had contacted me, Susie Flory, who wrote the book with me. And we ended up collaborating, and I enjoy that so much. I can write, but it ended up being so much better because the two of us collaborated and worked together. We each wrote some of the words, and we each helped edit that some of the words. And we ended up with a book that worked really well. And so I decided to do the same with the children's book we wrote, Running with Roselle, which I love to say more adults buy than people do, or than children do. And now there's a third book that will be out in August that's entitled Live Like a Guide Dog, Stories of a Blind Man and His Dogs Who Overcome Adversity, who are brave and learn and walk through faith. And walk forward through faith. And again, collaborating, I think, has made the book a lot stronger, which is the way I choose to do it. And I think there's so much value in it. And also it makes there be a whole lot less ego of, oh, it's my work. It is, I love teamwork. And I think that teamwork is so important in so many ways. And I know that for me, I think it will help make the book more successful.
Mm. I think it's so interesting how there's so many different paths to getting somewhere, because although I wrote my book on my own, I couldn't have done it without the people that were around me, the people that showed up to write every morning in the Zoom room, the questions I was able to ask in that room, the people in my first writing group who gave me all their feedback on my ideas and, really helped me move things forward. I think that, doing anything in a bubble is more difficult and probably not as good in the end.
Yeah. So again, the way you utilize teamwork may have been a little bit different, but probably not so different. But still having other people around to be part of the community always helps a great deal. And I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm.
Which
and I would say,
good.
I think the teamwork is so important. And that doing anything, I think over the last few years, if anything, that's one thing that I really learned is that, I want to do work that has people around me. I don't want to do work where I'm in a bubble on my own.
Yeah.
Because that to me is, it's just so fulfilling to work with people.
It is a whole lot more fun. And oftentimes you get some incredible new ideas that you didn't think of. And that's happened to me with the book. And it's also happened for me getting to do all of these podcasts because it's helped me clarify a lot of things, think about things in a different way. I mentioned I'm my own best teacher, and that came out in part of discussions I've had on a few of these podcasts. I love to feel that I need to learn at least as much as anybody else on these podcasts, or I'm not doing my job well. And I want to believe that I'm a better person for getting to do these. And it is a lot of fun. And every person who's ever come on this podcast is a part of the team, and listeners who comment are a part of the team. And it doesn't get any better than that.
I agree.
So it's really a lot of fun.
Mm.
So,
and there's something about all of us working together, that all the boats rise together kind of sentiment, like just that we lift each other up when we work together and when we create community and when we talk about the things that are hard for us or the things that are, like out there and what we're feeling and what's happening. I just feel like that nobody should isolate themselves. And it helps all of us when we talk about things and when we work together.
Well, when we're talking about big, gorgeous goals or talking about the things that we do, obviously we're visioning and we need to make a plan and plan along the way. What would you say about the difference or what it means to have the intersection of visioning and planning?
I think that it is about like spending the time to dream and think big, and also knowing that having a good plan to underpin it is going to help you get there. And so, I think a lot of people would be like, I'm great with the vision and like the follow through. Oh. Or people are like, I got all the steps, but that's kind of me. I have all the steps, but it's hard for me to value the visioning time. Mm-hmm. And so how do you get what you don't necessarily think you're good at or what you don't feel is comfortable doing, right? So, you help somebody, you get somebody to help you create the planning steps, like me, who's good at planning, or I get out into the world and talk to people who are great at big vision and bounce ideas around with them, and so how do you sort of like find the duality in that? And if you're good at both, like, I bow down to you because I would love that. But, so how do you just build ways for yourself to have help that you need to do the thing you feel you may not be good at?
And there's nothing wrong with asking, and there's nothing wrong with seeking help to make something work.
And I always say to my kids, like, no's are free, if somebody can't help you or doesn't have the knowledge or the time or whatever it is, they can say no. But if you don't ask, you'll never know what could have happened.
And that goes both ways, because sometimes it's better for you to say no because it just isn't the right thing for you. I'm a firm believer in something else that Gandhi said. You talked about be the change you want to see in the world. One of my other favorite expressions that I've learned over the years that Gandhi said is interdependence is and ought to be as much the ideal of man as his self-sufficiency. And that is so true.
Mm-hmm. It is true, because we can't be islands. We can't do things all on our own.
No, or at least even if we can, we shouldn't.
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, that's the most important part about it.
Yeah,
well, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for being here. If people want to reach out to you, maybe take you up on being a coach and so on, how do they do that?
They can find me on LinkedIn. They can also find me at julieellisandco.com.
And how do they find you on LinkedIn?
I am Julie Ellis.
ELLIS, right?
You got it. Yeah.
So Julie, JULIEELLIS. There you go. Well, this has been fun. And I really appreciate you being willing to come on and chat for an hour. And I hope that we've been able to give people some things to think about that are positive. I've got lots to go away and ponder some more, which for me is always fun to do. And I really appreciate you taking the time to do it. And I know that I probably won't use too many. Well, I won't read any Mabel's labels unless there is a Braille version, but that's okay.
True.
Yeah.
True. That would be a great product.
Well, there are, Dymo has developed a Braille labeler, but, over time, there will be more technologies and other ways of doing labels. I think we're going to go more into the ability for smartphones to recognize labels from a distance away, and it won't all be optical. So a lot of things happening.
Yep. Amazing, the technology and how we can advance so fast.
Isn't it scary?
Yeah.
Not really. It's great to do.
It's scary and amazing all at once.
It is. And I like the more amazing than scary. We don't need to be scared of it.
Nope.
Well, thank you for being here. And I want to thank you all for listening to us today. And again, love it if you would give us a 5-star rating wherever you're listening to us. Reach out to Julie. I'm sure she'd love to chat with you and help in any way that she can. I'd love to hear from you. You can email me, Michael, MICHAELHI, at accessibe, ACCESSIBE.com, or go to our podcast page, www.michaelhingson.com/podcast. And so we'd love to hear from you. And Michael Hingson is MICHAELHINGSON. So thanks again for listening. Love to get your reviews and your comments. and keep them coming. And we will be back next week with another episode, or actually in a few days with another episode of Unstoppable Mindset. And again, Julie, last time, thanks very much for being here and being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael. I loved our chat today.